Have you ever experienced a moment when everything seemed lost? That instant when time slows down, your heart races, and every second feels like a crushing weight on your chest. Imagine being surrounded by walls that seem to close in ever closer, with no escape in sight, no one around, and the only thing left is the fading hope that something or someone might appear. They were trapped, afraid, and certain that this would be the end, until a stranger opened the door. This isn't just a story about young people in danger. It's about courage, about the strength that comes from the unlikely, and about how sometimes an unexpected encounter can change everything. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you, and perhaps even change the way you view the role of strangers in your life. The scene begins on an ordinary day, the kind of day we live without imagining that something extraordinary could happen. Laughter, conversation, small everyday worries, everything seemed normal. But fate doesn't warn, it doesn't send clear signals, and when least expected, it turns the page and presents a completely different chapter, a chapter of tension, uncertainty, and above all, choice. Have you ever been there? A moment when a safe situation transforms in a matter of seconds into something completely out of control. It's the kind of moment when sounds change, the air becomes heavy, and your body reacts before you even understand what's happening. It was exactly like that for them. Within minutes, their routine was shattered and given way to real fear. It wasn't an abstract fear. It was the fear of not getting out of there. The atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Locked doors, inaccessible windows, the feeling of being surrounded on all sides. Every attempt to find a way out proved futile, and the more time passed, the harder it became to remain calm. Deep down, they knew, no one knew exactly where they were. No one could have imagined what was happening at that moment. But that's where the element that makes this story so remarkable comes in, the improbable. A stranger, someone who had never crossed their path before, was about to become the most important person in their lives. Someone who, for a reason still unknown, was in the right place at the right time and ready to act. Meanwhile, inside, the silence was interrupted only by rapid breathing and thoughts that hammered like a countdown. Can you imagine? Every sound from outside could be either a sign of danger or a possible salvation. And in this kind of situation, the mind works at top speed. Is someone coming? Will we make it out? What happened next sounds like something out of a movie, but it wasn't fiction. There was no script, no guaranteed ending, just life unfolding, raw, unpredictable, and intense. And at the center of it all, young people struggling with fear and trying to believe that somehow there was a chance. And then, a different sound. Footsteps. Pause. More footsteps. Heart races. Eyes fix on the door as if it were the only possible anchor. On the other side, someone hesitates, as if also trying to understand what was about to happen, until the doorknob moves, slowly. And in an instant, the impossible happens. The door opens. Stay with me, because this isn't just the story of how they were saved, but also of how a courageous act from a complete stranger can leave a lasting mark. An encounter like this isn't measured solely by what happened in the moment, but by what changed afterward. And once you know who this person was and why they were there, you'll realize that chance sometimes seems to follow a script better than any movie. But before we get to that point, we need to take a step back and understand how it all began, how those young people reached that critical moment, and what decisions, conscious or not, led them to cross the path of the unknown that would change their lives. Because the true power of this story lies not only in the rescue, but in the journey to it. And that's exactly where we'll go from here. But before we dive into the details of what happened next, I want to open up a space for you who are listening now. Stories like this don't just live in the memories of those who experienced them. They gain strength when they are shared, when they touch others and awaken something within us. So, if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. It could be a similar memory, a feeling this scene evoked, or even a reflection on how sometimes strangers can completely change the course of a life. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. Every comment you leave, every like you give, every time you subscribe, all of this helps take these stories far beyond the screen so that more people can feel the same way you're feeling right now. It's not just about numbers. It's about creating a community that believes in the power of unlikely encounters, in courage, and in the real impact that a single gesture can have. So, if you're feeling this connection, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way you'll ensure you don't miss future stories and help this message reach those who need to hear it most. Because at the end of the day, we never know when we'll be the stranger who opens the door for someone, or when someone will open that door for us. And speaking of open doors, it's time to go back to that moment when everything was about to change. The moment when, on the other side, a decision was made and the destiny of these young people began to be rewritten. They were no different from any group of young people you could imagine. They were between 18 and 22, that age when life seems like a wide-open field of possibilities. Some were studying at university, others working temporary jobs while dreaming of something bigger. There were those who talked about traveling the world, those who dreamed of starting their own business, and even those who simply wanted to live each day without worrying so much about tomorrow. They were friends united by simple moments, laughter for no reason, late-night conversations, plans that might never come to fruition, but that fueled a sense that anything was possible. Back then, their routine was typical: weekend get-togethers, after-school lunches, loud music in the car, and that sense of invincibility typical of youth. It's curious how at this stage of life, we believe that time is on our side, that nothing truly serious can happen, that the days will repeat themselves, and that there will always be a tomorrow to correct any mistake or fulfill any postponed desire. This mentality creates a comfortable bubble, but it also leaves us vulnerable when reality decides to knock on the door or slam it shut. And it was precisely on one of those seemingly ordinary days that everything began to change. There was no sign, no prediction. The mood was light, the conversation flowed, and they were simply enjoying the moment. It's strange to think that the most profound transformation in life can begin in a trivial moment, that a simple decision, like being in one place and not another, can be the thin line between safety and danger. The hidden truth behind this story is that there's no clear warning that we're about to embark on a journey that will test us emotionally, physically, and even spiritually. There's no way to rehearse for it. It's always through improvisation, instinct, that we discover who we truly are and where our strength comes from. And that day, these young people were about to learn that lesson painfully. What happened first was almost imperceptible, a detail that could have gone unnoticed by anyone not paying attention. A distant noise, a strange movement, an exchanged look that seemed to say, "Did you feel that too?" At first, no one paid it any attention. The conversation continued, as did the laughter, but there was something in the air, as if the temperature had changed. Small things began to seem out of place, and it's in these moments that decisions begin to matter. Stay or leave, ignore or investigate. This is the part that never appears in the background of great stories, the silent minutes before impact, the interval between normality and chaos. It was in this interval that danger crept unnoticed. As the scenery changed, the sense of security began to unravel. That bubble of invincibility shattered with every passing second, replaced by a growing awareness that something wasn't right. Smiles gave way to attentive looks. The sound of voices gave way to silence, a heavy silence that seemed to amplify every step, every breath. And then, almost suddenly, the environment ceased to be just a place and became a prison, not in the traditional sense with visible bars and locks, but in the claustrophobic sense that the exits had disappeared. The door, until then just another element of the scene, came to symbolize the line between danger and freedom, and in that moment, it was closed. The curious thing is that, even in situations like these, human instinct seeks a way out. They tried to remain calm, sought alternatives, mentally scoured every possibility, and it was in this search that they realized no one knew exactly where they were, and any help would depend on pure luck or something greater. This awareness alone began to change their mindset. It was as if suddenly they had been thrown into a kind of invisible test, where every thought and every decision could determine the next chapter of their story. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because when we analyze moments like these, we realize they're not just about physical survival, but about internal transformation. It's the kind of situation that reveals strengths you didn't know you had, that redefines priorities, that clearly shows which bonds are truly strong and which crumble under pressure. There's a huge psychological impact in feeling completely vulnerable and at the same time responsible for yourself and others. It's in these moments that revelations emerge about who we truly are and who is willing to be by our side, even when under no obligation to do so. These young people didn't know it, but they were about to experience an encounter that would shatter all odds. One gesture, one decision, and one unexpected presence would change not only the course of that night, but the way they would view life from then on. And this transformation began long before the door opened. It began the moment they realized they would need to trust the improbable. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The day began like any other, with that calm air that makes us believe nothing out of the ordinary will happen. The sun was already illuminating the streets, but there was still a slight freshness in the air, typical of mornings that invite leisurely departures. They met early, with that carefree energy of those who know they have hours and hours ahead to laugh, talk, and simply be together. One of them brought a coffee. Another arrived fiddling with his phone, telling a joke he couldn't wait to finish. The setting was banal, but comfortable, the kind of routine that goes unnoticed because, in our minds, it will repeat itself over and over again. They continued their day without any sense of urgency. They went to the same place they always had, the spot that, for them, was almost a refuge. There was nothing on the horizon to indicate that they were about to embark on a journey that would test not only their physical endurance, but also their emotional. This is the hidden truth about great events. They rarely arrive without warning. They infiltrate normality, blending into the mundane details until suddenly everything changes. The room was filled with ordinary sounds, distant conversations, hurried footsteps of those with appointments, the wind stirring the trees. But if one could freeze that moment and peer behind the scenes, one would already realize that the thread of fate was moving silently. The decisions they made that morning, the time to meet, the route they chose, the place where they decided to stop, all seemed simple, almost automatic. Yet it was precisely these small choices that were leading them to the precise point where history would take a turn. It's curious how our mindset tends to ignore the impact of these smallest decisions. We think that life's greatest moments are the result of big choices, but often it's the almost invisible steps that lead us to the unexpected. And that day, the transformation began well before any sign of danger. It began with the fact that everyone was there, together in the same space at the same time, as if something greater had planned this coincidence. The early afternoon arrived, bringing a gentle warmth and a feeling of welcome laziness. Conversations grew longer, gestures slower as if the world had slowed down. Laughter came easily as if nothing could interrupt that peace. But it was precisely in this atmosphere that the first crack in the perfect day began to appear, a distant sound, something that didn't fit in with the scenery but wasn't taken seriously at first. That's how it begins. The unusual disguises itself as irrelevant. They continued, as if ignoring it were enough to keep things under control. But the atmosphere was beginning to feel different, a slight tension, almost imperceptible but real. It was as if the atmosphere itself was shifting, setting the stage for a revelation no one had asked for. Quick glances began to exchange, still without words, just that silent communication that says something's wrong. This was the first time that day that they realized they were more alert than they would have liked. It's amazing how quickly the body and mind adapt when they sense something might be about to happen. Breathing deepens, senses sharpen. Every noise, every movement takes on greater importance. It's the invisible transition from lightness to alertness. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this shift from normality to tension isn't just a narrative detail. It's key to understanding the impact an event can have on someone's life. When we're immersed in routine, our perception of risk is minimal, and it's precisely this reliance on the predictable that makes us more vulnerable. The shock comes not only from the event itself, but from the stark contrast with what came before. It's this contrast that makes the day's memory so intensely etched. If someone had told them that morning that they would be experiencing one of the most defining moments of their lives, they probably would have laughed. That's the irony. Most of our most transformative journeys begin disguised as an ordinary day, and behind the scenes, fate continues to adjust its pieces, as if it knows exactly when to turn the tables. From then on, the signs would become clearer. That initial feeling that something was out of place would cease to be just a hunch and become a tangible reality. And when that happened, there would be no more room for ignoring. They would be forced to act, to make quick decisions, to face the unknown head-on. But for now, there was still a brief interval between the carefree laughter and the moment when the door, both symbolic and literal, would become the only possible exit. Right there. I'm on this journey too. It was too fast for anyone to predict, but slow enough for every detail to be etched in memory. The sound that had previously seemed distant was now close, urgent, cutting through the air with a clarity that chilled the body. The conversation suddenly ceased, as if everyone had made a silent pact to listen. Eyes met, and in that instant there was no longer any doubt. Something was wrong. It was no longer a vague impression or an inexplicable discomfort. It was real, and it was happening. The first concrete sign came in the form of an impact, a dull bang, followed by a vibration that traveled through the floor and up the walls. Objects shook. The air felt heavier, as if charged with electricity. This is the kind of moment when the mind struggles to find a logical explanation, but the body already knows this is no ordinary occurrence. Instinct begins to scream before any reasoning can even form. The threat could take many forms. It didn't matter if it was an accident, a natural disaster, or a violent situation. The effect was the same. The world around us became unfamiliar. The place that had been safe minutes before now seemed narrow, unstable, fragile. It's curious how perception changes so quickly. The walls which once protected now seemed to imprison. The doors, which were once just a detail, became an obstacle. Confusion gripped the room. Some tried to understand what was happening. Others were already searching for a way out. But it was as if all avenues had suddenly disappeared. The sound of danger didn't come from just one point. It echoed from all sides, making it impossible to know where to run. And amidst this, an even more frightening silence emerged, not the silence of calm, but the silence charged with tension, the one that precedes the next blow. Expressions changed, wide eyes, rapid breathing, tense muscles. It's remarkable how in seconds mentality shifted, from relaxation to survival. Everyone began to measure their own space, mentally searching for any object or path that might represent protection. Time, which had previously flowed freely, now seemed to move forward in heavy blocks, as if each second required effort to traverse. In this kind of situation, there's no perfect manual of actions. Everything is improvised. It's the sum of experience, reflexes, and even luck. The hidden truth is that, no matter how much we try to control life, there are events that simply drag us into them, and all we can do is decide how we'll react. And that's exactly what started to happen there. The sound returned, this time more intense, accompanied by something no one wanted to hear, the crack of something giving way. It could be wood, metal, concrete. It doesn't matter. The meaning is the same. Barriers are being broken. This perception creates an immediate psychological impact. It's confirmation that danger isn't just approaching, it's already within the territory. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there's something fascinating and frightening about the way the body and mind work in these moments. There's an involuntary alignment between reason and instinct that we rarely experience in other circumstances. It's as if everything non-essential disappears, leaving only the focus on what can guarantee the next breath. This is one of the most intense revelations that extreme situations bring, absolute clarity about what truly matters. The young people, even without saying a word, began to move with more precision. They looked around as if mapping every detail, the position of windows, the reach of doors, the distance to possible shelter. It was a silent dance between fear and action, and each step was calculated even if unconsciously. Behind the scenes of this reaction lay a gigantic emotional charge. The fear wasn't just of the present moment, but of what might happen in the next few seconds. The noise grew louder, the sounds blending into a chaos that made it impossible to discern their exact origin. And in this maelstrom, every decision took on weight. Should I move or stay? Should I scream for help or remain silent? This constant mental evaluation is exhausting, but necessary, because in moments like these, every choice can be definitive. The space seemed to shrink with every passing moment. Physical boundaries drew closer, as if trying to push them into a corner. And in this scenario, any sign of movement outside became a beacon of hope. Tension was at its peak, but there was also a strange sense that something was about to happen, something that could change everything for better or worse. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The moment the perception of danger turned into absolute certainty was also the moment hopelessness began to take shape. It was no longer a simple fright or the expectation that somehow things would return to normal. It was the realization that there was no visible way out. The doors, previously merely closed, now seemed like insurmountable barriers. The windows, small and unreachable, offered no real chance. The space, which minutes before had seemed vast, now felt cramped, suffocating, as if the air grew denser with each breath. Fear didn't come as a scream, but as a constant whisper, gnawing at them from within. Each of them, at that moment, carried a whirlwind of thoughts that went far beyond the present. Some tried to recall stories they'd heard about similar situations, as if searching for an example might offer a clue to a solution. Others lost themselves in personal memories, recalling faces, conversations, promises, and this emotional avalanche was accompanied by a painful question: will I have another chance to live this again? Uncertainty was a silent weight. With each passing minute, it became harder to keep my mind focused on something positive. It was as if an internal cycle repeated itself, searching for a way out, realizing there wasn't one, feeling despair grow, trying to calm down, and then falling back into the same pit of anxiety. And in the midst of it all, there was the sound outside, unpredictable, changing in intensity as if a cruel reminder that danger was in no hurry. The curious thing is that, even on the verge of surrender, the survival instinct persisted. They looked at each other, searching for some sign of strength in the other's face. There was no need to say much. A gesture, a fixed gaze was enough for them to understand that they were all trying to hold on to their courage. And yet, there were moments when that courage failed. Shoulders hunched, bodies felt heavier, breathing became irregular. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because hopelessness, despite seeming like an endpoint, is often just part of the journey. It acts as a brutal mirror, clearly showing who we are without the masks of routine. When there are no guarantees, we are forced to grapple with the hidden truths we've avoided facing. It's at this point that revelations emerge about priorities, what truly matters, and which decisions truly matter. In that group, each person handled the weight differently. One of them closed their eyes for long seconds, perhaps trying to imagine they were somewhere else. Another stared at the door, as if they could open it with the force of their will. A third paced back and forth, searching for any detail that might have been overlooked. And all of them, without exception, felt that strange mixture of helplessness and an urgent desire to react. Time seemed to play tricks on them. Sometimes it passed too quickly, as if each breath stole minutes, and sometimes it dragged on, trapping them in an eternal present. This back and forth between acceleration and slowness increased their psychological pressure. Their minds searched for impossible solutions, creating and discarding scenarios in a matter of seconds. And as each idea failed, the feeling of being trapped became more real. But there was something that hadn't completely faded, the spark that somehow a turnaround might happen. Maybe it was pure instinct. Maybe it was just the desire not to give up. This minimal hope wasn't enough to alleviate the fear, but it was what kept their bodies moving. Even though they were physically limited, they still searched for something, a different sound, an unexpected movement, any sign that the situation might change. Tension seeped into every gesture. Even the act of breathing seemed to require more effort. And no matter how hard they tried to maintain control, there were moments when the silence was broken by an overly long sigh or an involuntary murmur. These small signs betrayed the effort each was making to not completely give in to the feeling of defeat. It was an invisible battle, fought as much against what was happening outside as against their own thoughts. And that's precisely where hopelessness reaches its most dangerous point, when it begins to convince us that fighting is futile. At this stage, every decision requires double the effort, and any action seems fraught with risk. It's a delicate psychological territory, where all it takes is a single detail, for better or worse, to completely change the course of history. Yet, amidst this suffocating pressure, something began to move subtly, almost imperceptibly. And though no one there yet knew what it meant, the mere existence of this movement was enough to make their eyes meet again, as if to say without words, maybe it's not over yet. Right there. I'm on this journey too. It was in that tense silence, when every breath seemed to echo louder than it should, that a different sound stood out. It wasn't the creak of wood, nor the distant scratching that had already become part of the scenery. It was a footstep, firm but calculated, coming from somewhere no one could identify. Eyes automatically turned to the door, and it was in that instant that the atmosphere shifted. There was no way to explain it, but something about that invisible presence carried a different weight. For a few seconds, nothing could be seen but the darkness of the corridor outside, but the sound continued, getting closer. The curious thing is that, even with all the fear that already gripped them, this new element not only brought more tension, it also brought a hint of curiosity. Who, in such a dangerous situation, would be approaching that place? Why risk it? Logic dictated that any sensible person would stay away. And then, in the doorway, a silhouette appeared, His face couldn't be seen clearly, only its outlines outlined by the dim light coming from somewhere behind him. There was something about the way he moved, unhurriedly but with clear intention, that conveyed the feeling this wasn't a random entrance. It was as if he knew exactly where he was going and why he needed to be there. At first, no one moved. The tension was almost palpable, as if everyone was waiting for an explanation that never came. The stranger stopped in front of the door and remained silent for a moment that seemed endless. And in that space of time, the questions multiplied. Who is he? Where did he come from? And most importantly, what is his purpose here? Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because moments like these carry a powerful narrative force. It's not just about the appearance of someone unexpected, it's about the psychological impact it causes. When hopelessness had already taken hold, the arrival of this figure broke the mental cycle that had been repeating itself. It created a new variable, something beyond control, but which could also mean a way out. It's the breaking of the pattern that reignites the spark of possibility. He took a step forward, and the light partially revealed his face. It wasn't someone any of them knew. He wasn't a friend nor a relative, much less someone who, in the logic of the moment, should have been there. His presence was unlikely from any angle. The strangest thing was that despite this, there was a serenity in his gaze, as if he'd seen worse situations and knew exactly how to act. The group's breathing hitched. Some instinctively backed away, while others took a small step toward the door, almost without realizing it. The mystery surrounding that figure was both a warning and an invitation. It was impossible to decide whether trusting him would be a wise decision or a huge risk. But in that setting, even risk was starting to seem like an attractive option. His movements were calculated, and it didn't go unnoticed. He didn't seem scared. He wasn't fazed by the distant sound of danger, nor by the charged atmosphere of the place. This posture conveyed a silent message. He wasn't there by chance. Perhaps he had information no one else had, or perhaps he was following an instinct as strong as theirs. The hidden truth is that the presence of someone like this, at the lowest point of a journey, changes anyone's mindset. It's as if the plot had suddenly gained a new character who could turn the story upside down. And even without fully understanding who he was, the young people began to realize that the situation was no longer under the same shadowy control as before. There was, in that moment, a human factor that could break the narrative that until then seemed closed. He leaned forward slightly to examine the door, carefully touching the handle and testing the weight of the latch. His eyes didn't say much, but they also didn't hide the fact that he had a plan. It wasn't clear if it would be possible to execute it, but the mere knowledge that he had a strategy changed the mood. Suddenly fear shared space with a new feeling, anticipation. The air felt different now, charged not only with the weight of danger, but also with the tension of the unknown. Each second of silence felt like an eternity, but for the first time since it all began, that eternity was accompanied by a what if. What if he could actually open that door? What if there was something beyond it that meant freedom? Comment there. That makes sense to me. The moment seemed to stretch beyond time, as if the outside world had stopped simply to observe what was about to happen. The stranger's hand remained firm on the doorknob, and the group, almost without realizing it, held their breath. The silence was so thick that they could hear the faint creak of the metal under the pressure of his fingers. Then, with a calculated movement, he slowly turned the latch. The dry sound of the mechanism giving way echoed through the space like an unmistakable signal of change. It wasn't just a click. It was a symbolic breaking of everything that had kept them trapped until that moment. As the door began to move, even just a few inches, a rush of fresh air filled the room. It was as if the space, suffocated by fear, finally breathed. The contrast was almost brutal, from the heavy, stagnant air to a fresh breath, full of possibilities. The young people's eyes widened, and in their gleams a mixture of disbelief and relief could be seen. It was as if they were seeing the first light after a long night. Every inch the door opened revealed more than what lay outside. It also revealed the shattering of a narrative that until then seemed hopeless. It was the kind of transformation that comes not with speeches, but with silent actions that speak louder than any words. And the impact was immediate. Shoulders straightened, the body prepared to move, the heart raced not out of fear, but out of anticipation. The stranger maintained absolute control of the situation, without sudden movements, but with the confidence of someone who understands the importance of every detail. He pushed the door open wide enough for everyone to pass through, But he didn't turn around immediately. His eyes seemed to scan the hallway as if mapping out the route before advancing. This attention to the behind-the-scenes action was in itself a reminder that the danger wasn't over, but that the opportunity to change course was there, within reach. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because opening a door at a time like this isn't just a physical act. It's a symbolic break from the mental state of imprisonment. Until then, the group's mindset had been shaped by the absence of options, by the suffocating repetition of the feeling of being trapped. When the door opened, it freed not only bodies but also ideas. Suddenly, new possibilities began to form in each person's mind. Decisions that previously seemed non-existent now needed to be made urgently. Run, wait, follow the unknown, seek another path. The hidden truth is that freedom, when it arrives so abruptly, also requires courage to embrace. It's easy to imagine that everyone would run away as soon as they had the chance, but the reality is that after so much time in uncertainty, taking the first step out requires as much as enduring what's left behind. This silent dilemma is an essential part of the journey. It separates the moment of relief from true transformation. The air from outside carried new sounds, clearer now, hurried footsteps somewhere in the distance, perhaps muffled voices. Every detail served as information to help them plan their next move. The tension hadn't disappeared, only transformed. Now it mingled with the impulse to move forward, creating a state of alertness that could both protect and paralyze. The group exchanged a quick glance, and without a word, they knew they were ready to move on. The open door represented more than an exit. It was a reminder that, even in the most unlikely scenario, an unexpected intervention can change everything. This was the revelation that just minutes before had seemed impossible. The stranger gave a subtle nod, indicating the way, and in that instant, there was no time to hesitate. One by one, they moved toward the opening, crossing the invisible boundary between fear and action. Each step was charged with adrenaline, and also with a strange sense that they were leaving behind more than just a physical space. They were abandoning a version of themselves that no longer fit into what was to come. The hallway ahead seemed wider than it actually was, illuminated by a light that wasn't quite bright, but was enough to guide. The sound of the door being pushed against the wall echoed like confirmation that the impossible had happened. There was still danger, there was still uncertainty, but now there was also movement, and movement means life. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. As soon as they walked through the door, it was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from each of them. The air felt lighter, the space felt wider, and the feeling of finally moving brought such intense relief that some had to stop for a moment just to breathe. The adrenaline was still pumping, but now it was accompanied by something different, the certainty that they had escaped the worst. One of the young men brought his hands to his face, and tears came without warning, as if all the pent-up fear had found a single outlet. Another, almost without realizing it, hugged his closest friend so tightly, as if to reassure him he was still there. The words came out quickly, in a rush. "Are you okay? I thought it wasn't going to work. Oh my God, we did it." Each sentence was short, but packed with immense emotional weight. It wasn't just talk. It was urgent confirmation that everyone had survived that moment that, until recently, had seemed impossible to overcome. The stranger, who still kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, received looks of silent gratitude. There was no time for lengthy thanks, but the recognition was there, visible on everyone's faces and in the way they approached him. One of the most striking details was how even amidst the relief, each person reacted uniquely. Some laughed, not out of pure joy, but with that nervous laugh that arises when the body still doesn't know how to process what it has just experienced. Some remained serious, breathing deeply, trying to regain control of themselves, and there were those who couldn't stop looking back, as if constantly reaffirming that the door was still open, that they weren't dreaming. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this moment of rescue isn't just about physically escaping a dangerous place. It's about the silent transformation that happens internally. When the mind realizes it has survived, it undergoes an almost immediate reconfiguration. What once seemed important loses its power, and new priorities emerge, clear and non-negotiable. It's at this point that deeper decisions begin to form, even if still unconsciously. The impact of this kind of experience extends far beyond the moment the danger is behind us. It lingers in the depths of memory, shaping future thoughts and attitudes. After experiencing something so intense, every gesture of care, every word of support, and every hug carries a heightened meaning. The young people knew that, from that moment on, their stories were intertwined in a way that nothing could undo. No matter how much time passed, that moment of relief would be an anchor in their lives. The stranger, still silent, began leading the group down a narrow corridor. There was no guarantee that the danger was over, but trust in him was already established. The mere fact that he had appeared when all seemed lost gave the impression that there was more security than actually existed. And it's curious how the collective mentality works in situations like these. When one figure demonstrates courage and control, the entire group grows stronger. A few steps later, one of the young men, his voice still trembling, managed a nearly whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just to the stranger, but to everyone who had somehow contributed to their presence. This simple thank you, spoken amidst the chaos, carried a weight that needed no explanation. It was the verbalization of a feeling everyone shared, but not everyone could express at that moment. The contrast between what they had felt minutes before and what they felt now was so great, it seemed impossible to measure. Before, every second was a test of endurance. Now every second was a gift to be savored. And yet the tension didn't completely disappear. Their hearts pounded, no longer from absolute fear, but from the recognition that there was still a journey to be made. The surrounding environment was brighter, and this physical change seemed to reflect one's internal state. It wasn't just a matter of literal light, but of mental clarity. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds clearer. It was as if the senses had been awakened to perceive every detail, the smell of the air, the texture of the ground, even the gentle warmth coming from outside. Everything became more intense, and amidst this whirlwind of emotions, a hidden truth emerged. Relief doesn't erase what was experienced, but gives it new meaning. What was once mere suffering begins to transform into history, a lesson, a memory that shapes how we see the world. The young people knew that when they looked back, they wouldn't just remember the fear, but also the courage that emerged when they needed it most. The path wasn't yet completely clear, but now there was movement, there was direction, and with each step, the conviction also grew that despite what they might still face, they had already overcome the worst. This silent but powerful awareness was what kept them moving forward together, leaving no one behind. Comment there. That makes sense to me. After that day, nothing was the same again. It wasn't just about what they had faced, but about what that experience had provoked within each of them. It was as if they had all passed through an invisible door that led them to see the world in a completely different way. The memory of fear was still vivid, but now it was accompanied by something much deeper. The awareness of the value of being alive and of having people, even strangers, willing to lend a hand at the right moment. The courage of the man who appeared at that critical moment was indelible in their minds. It wasn't just the physical gesture of opening a door, but what it symbolized. Someone decided to risk themselves for people they'd never met before. This decision, as simple as it might seem at first glance, carried enormous weight, and it was impossible for them not to wonder how many times in their own lives they had failed to act out of fear, uncertainty, or the false belief that "it's not my problem." The days that followed were a mix of relief and new beginnings. In the early days, the conversation revolved around the details of what had happened, the sound of footsteps, the click of the doorknob, the first breath of fresh air. But gradually the topic took on a new dimension. They began to talk about the importance of small acts, about how an unexpected gesture can have an incalculable impact on someone's life. The experience had made it clear that solidarity and empathy are not just pretty concepts to be discussed. They are real forces capable of changing destinies. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this transformation isn't limited to gratitude for what was done. It extends to the way they began to lead their own lives. Each of their mindsets underwent subtle but significant adjustments. Previously, many of them thought about the future almost automatically, unaware that every decision made in the present could be a turning point for someone else. Later, they began to realize that we are all at some point the unknown who can open the door for someone else. This revelation also brought a kind of silent commitment. They didn't speak about it as a formal pact, but it was implicit in their gestures and new attitudes. They began to be more attentive to their surroundings, to notice when someone needed help, even if they didn't ask for it. They began to value human contact in a more genuine way, unhurriedly, without the emotional distance we so often use as protection. The impact also manifested itself behind the scenes in each person's life. Small everyday situations that previously went unnoticed were now seen as opportunities to make a difference. One young person said that, weeks later, he helped a stranger on the street without even thinking twice. Another reported that he began to dedicate more time to listening to people, even in brief conversations, because he understood that sometimes the simple act of listening can be as liberating as opening a door. And, of course, there was the presence of the man who made it all possible. Although they didn't have much time to talk that day, they managed to meet him later. Their reunion was marked by hugs and the attempt, always insufficient, to put into words their gratitude. He, in turn, responded simply, saying he only did what he thought was right. That phrase echoed in their minds. What I thought was right. It was almost a key to understanding that courage isn't born solely from strength or the absence of fear, but from a firm decision to act, even in the face of risk. This journey made it clear that empathy isn't something learned only from books or lectures. It's built in practice the moment you put yourself in someone else's shoes and decide to do something about it. And the more they reflected on this, the more they realized the impact of that encounter went far beyond the group, because every action they took from that point on could generate a ripple effect, reaching people who would never have known that that specific day had been the starting point. Looking back, they saw not just an episode of danger and rescue, but a vivid lesson in interdependence. Fear and relief were just parts of a larger narrative, one that spoke to the human capacity to connect and act for the good of others. And deep down, they all held the same certainty. The world would be radically different if more people chose, from time to time, to be the stranger who opens the door. Comment there. That makes sense to me. As time passed, that memory didn't fade like so many others that life insists on erasing. On the contrary, it seemed to gain more strength with each new situation in which one of them found themselves faced with a choice, to act or to do nothing. The figure of that man, appearing at the precise moment when all seemed lost, became almost a silent symbol that each of them carried within them. No matter the setting, a busy street, a day at work, a trivial conversation, suddenly, the memory of that moment came as a subtle reminder: there is always the chance to make a difference. This influence wasn't limited to grand gestures. It was in the small actions, in the carefully chosen words, in the patience to listen, in the willingness to help even when there was nothing to gain. And perhaps this was the most profound transformation, the understanding that impact isn't measured solely by scale but by intention, because sometimes an act that seems small to you can mean everything to someone else. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this experience revealed something many spend their entire lives without realizing. We live surrounded by invisible stories, unseen battles, and opportunities to be the turning point in someone's storyline. But for that to happen, you have to be willing to pay attention. The man who opened that door had no script, didn't know how it would all end, but had the mindset to act anyway. This is the hidden truth that separates those who merely watch from the audience and those who, dressed in suits, step onto the stage. When we understand that our decisions have the power to alter trajectories, we begin to live with greater presence. And this is a daily exercise. We won't always encounter dramatic situations like the one they experienced, but every day we encounter micro moments where we can choose between following autopilot or doing something that, however simple, carries meaning. The group realized that this encounter had not only saved their lives in a literal sense, it had also changed their course in a symbolic sense. They were no longer the same people who had entered that closed room. They had gone through a journey of fear, uncertainty, decision, and finally freedom. And in the midst of it all, they discovered that courage lies not only in facing danger, but in opening oneself to trust, to accept help, to allow oneself to be transformed by others. This new way of seeing the world spread to other areas of life. Old relationships were revisited. Conversations that had been pending for years finally took place. Some changed their way of working. Others decided to invest time in causes they hadn't even known about before. It was as if the experience had wiped away a cloudy window, revealing a scenario that had always been there, but which they couldn't see clearly. And from time to time, when they gathered, the subject would return, not to revive their fear, but to reinforce the importance of being alert to opportunities to do for someone else what that man had done for them. The story had ceased to be theirs alone and had become a silent guide, a constant reminder that, however unpredictable life may be, it's always possible to be the turning point in someone else's journey. Sometimes the greatest heroes are those we never expect to meet. They don't wear capes, they don't receive medals, and they often disappear as quickly as they arrive. But they leave behind something that never fades, the certainty that one gesture can change everything. And when this awareness sets in, it's impossible to look at the world the same way again. Comment there, I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, I think this story spoke to you in some way. So, take advantage of this moment and subscribe to the channel, because it's exactly this kind of content that inspires, moves, and makes you think that I want to continue bringing you. Also, leave a comment saying, I'm with you until the end, just so I know you were with me on this journey until the very last second. And of course, if this connection resonated with you, leave a like. It's a simple way to show that this time was worth it. Now, if you want to continue delving into this topic, there's a video here that complements this conversation. Click and stay with me there.